There is a psychological phenomenon called the spotlight effect. Researchers discovered that people consistently overestimate how much other people are noticing them. We walk into a room and feel like every eye is watching, every mind is judging, and so we respond to that invisible pressure. We speak louder, we position ourselves, we work to control the impression we leave. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When we are too focused on how we appear, we stop being present to what is actually happening around us. Think about the last time you were in a conversation and you were already forming your response before the other person finished speaking. You weren't listening to understand, you were listening to reply, to add, to redirect the conversation back towards something you knew. That is not intelligence. That is ego wearing the costume of intelligence. And it costs you something you may not realize you're losing. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. This channel is built for people who want to think more deeply, not just feel temporarily motivated. You know that feeling. You're sitting in a room, a meeting, a conversation, maybe a dinner, and something shifts inside you. Someone starts talking, and without even deciding to, your mind begins preparing, calculating, getting ready to respond with something sharp, something that proves you belong there, something that proves you know. You're not fully listening anymore. You're performing. And the strange thing is, you've probably done this your entire life without ever noticing it, because it doesn't feel like insecurity. It feels like confidence. But what if that impulse, that quiet need to appear smart, is the very thing that has been keeping you from becoming wiser? If that question made you pause, stay with me. What I'm about to share might quietly change the way you move through every room you walk into. Here is the mechanism. When a person's identity becomes tied to being the smart one, something subtle happens inside their mind. Asking a question starts to feel dangerous. Saying, "I don't know," starts to feel like weakness. Listening deeply, really listening, starts to feel like falling behind. So they stop doing those things. They stop asking. They stop wondering. They fill the silence with what they already know because silence feels like losing ground. But the irony is devastating. The moment you stop asking questions, you stop receiving answers. The moment you decide you already know, the world stops teaching you. And the people around you, people who might have offered you something genuinely valuable, they sense it. They feel you waiting for your turn to speak rather than receiving what they're saying. And so, they give you less. Not because they're withholding, but because you've already signaled that you're not really there. Imagine two people in the same room. The first person talks confidently. They reference what they know. They connect ideas quickly. They leave an impression. People remember them. The second person says very little. They ask a few careful questions. They listen with their full attention. They notice what other people miss, the hesitation in someone's voice, the idea that was mentioned once and then dropped, the contradiction nobody else caught. At the end of the evening, who learned more? Who left with a deeper understanding of the people in that room? Who is better positioned tomorrow because of what they gathered today? This is not a theoretical question. This is a real, observable difference between two ways of moving through life. And most people are so busy being the first person that they never discover the extraordinary power of being the second. There is a man named Michael Francese, a former organized crime figure who later rebuilt his life and began speaking publicly about the psychology of influence, trust, and survival. In one conversation, he shared something that sounds almost counterintuitive at first. He explained that in many situations, especially high-stakes ones, it is far more strategic to let people believe you know less than you actually do. Think about what happens when someone believes you already know everything. They become careful. They edit themselves. They hold back. But when they believe you're still learning, when they sense no threat from you, they talk freely. They reveal things. They explain their reasoning. They lower the walls they normally keep up. And in that openness, you hear everything. Not because you tricked them, but because you created a space where they felt safe enough to be honest. Francese wasn't describing manipulation. He was describing something far more profound, the quiet power of humility as a listening instrument. The person who already knows everything receives nothing new. The person who remains genuinely curious receives the world. Let's go a little deeper. Why does this happen? Why do so many people feel this pressure to appear intelligent in the first place? It almost always traces back to one source: fear. Fear of being underestimated, fear of being overlooked, fear that if people discover the gaps in your knowledge, they will stop taking you seriously. And buried beneath that fear, usually formed long before adulthood, is a belief that your value is tied to how much you know. If you were praised for being smart as a child, your brain learned a painful equation: intelligence equals worth. And from that moment, any threat to your image of intelligence became a threat to your identity itself. That is why "I don't know" can feel so difficult to say out loud. That is why interrupting someone to correct them can feel like self-protection rather than arrogance. That is why some of the most intelligent people you'll ever meet are also some of the most closed. They are protecting something, but what they're protecting is already shrinking them. True intelligence, the kind that compounds over a lifetime, looks nothing like what most people expect. It is not loud. It is not quick to impress. It is patient. It asks more questions than it answers. It sits with discomfort rather than rushing to resolve it. It enters rooms without an agenda to prove anything and leaves those rooms richer for it. The wisest people I have ever observed share one trait above all others. They make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. Not because they are pretending to listen, but because they genuinely are. Because somewhere along the way, they learned that every person, every single person, carries a perspective they have never encountered before. And that perspective, however small, has the potential to teach them something they could not have found alone. That is not passivity. That is a discipline. A quiet, rigorous, deeply demanding discipline. So, here's what I want to leave you with. The next time you walk into a room, notice the pull. Notice the moment your mind begins preparing to perform. And in that moment, choose something different. Choose curiosity over display. Choose listening over positioning. Choose the question over the answer you already have. Because the person who always needs to be the smartest in the room will always be limited by their own ceiling. But the person who remains humble enough to learn from every room they enter, that person has no ceiling at all. Real intelligence is not what you prove to others. It is what you quietly build from them. Stay curious, stay humble, and remember, the room is always teaching. The only question is whether you're still willing to be a student.